Hi guys, it's me again, Sam from the Unity of Life, and welcome back to the Unity of Life's temporary shed, which is kind of like our recording studio. And no, I am not kidding, this is literally a shed. You just can't see all the bits and bobs. So again, if you've been following any of my videos, you'll know that we're doing this series on F1, the Drive to Survive Netflix documentary series. I'm talking you through every single episode, so there's like 30 of them, so we're in for quite a ride. You will have also known that we've already covered the history, and of F1, and after I've talked about each episode of the Drive to Survive series, I am then going to be talking about inspirational women in motorsports. It's not just necessarily F1, and there is a reason, which again, if you've seen the videos, you'll know about this reason. It's because I'm a huge feminist and I don't feel like there's a lot of females whatsoever in this sport, and we need more females in this sport. Completely. And we need more opportunities for children to be able to get into the sport as well. Anyway, that's for another video to go into a little bit more detail about. And today we are now on the Drive to Survive episode 3 of the very first season. And like I keep reminding everybody, this was back in 2018 and things have dramatically changed in the last 3 years, which I am aware of, so I don't need anybody to put in the comments that this is a little bit outdated, okay? So like I said, you don't need to watch the series to know what we are talking about, and if you haven't watched the series, I still highly recommend it. And if you've watched the series, great, you'll be able to help me out and fill in a little bit of the gaps, because I may miss some. So like I said, in the last episode, I didn't have very many notes because that episode didn't interest me or speak to me all that much. This one I have a little bit more notes, so this video is probably going to be a little bit longer, because this one was much more of interest, because there was a little bit more drama going on behind the scenes. So in this episode we are looking at Red Bull and Williams, because like I said, this series, it does seem to look at the different drivers. It does try to talk to the other teams, and it's not necessarily always the big teams, and I think they have spoken to every team in the series. So this one was when Daniel Ricciardo, he was driving for Red Bull. Again, if I've butchered anybody's names, I do apologise. So Dan and Max were teammates, right? They both raced for Red Bull, and Daniel had been driving with them since he was like 18, I believe, at this point. And they weren't really loyal to him, which we're going to get into. So the very first thing that we see on this episode is that there's a race. I'm not sure which race this was, but Daniel was trying to get past Max, and the team were trying to let him get past, I think, but Max, being, well, the guy that he is, he didn't want to let his teammate pass, and that caused a bit of a crash. So because one didn't want to let the other one pass, they both got wiped out of the race and they didn't get any points. Like I said, if you're going to be an F1 team, you want at least one of your cars up on that podium, if not both of them, because you're going to get even more points. But you certainly want at least one driver on that podium. And you don't really want your drivers to be taken out by one another. So Daniel was made to feel guilty of the fact that he crashed into Max, even though Max would not let him past. And it also did seem that they were putting both their drivers up against each other, which, like I said, it's not very good, because even though you're racing purely for yourself, you're still working as a team, and it is still all about teamwork. and like I said, you really want to get both your racers and drivers up onto that podium, which isn't going to happen if they're too busy trying to crash into one another, which has happened in quite a few different teams, and again we're going to explore that in later episodes as well. So this did seem that Max was the favourite driver, and even though they denied it, Red Bull's team, they denied that Max was the favourite. The team was Team Max, basically, from what I can gather, because he was quite young. He's only a year older than me, and they really wanted him to be the youngest world championship driver, which hasn't happened. He's I believe Vettel still holds the title for that, Sebastian Vettel. So he's Max is kind of past being the youngest one, but they're still pushing for him to win a world championship. And as you know, in 2021, that racing series is getting quite interesting, to say the least. I mean, it's frustrating me because I don't really like Red Bull after watching all this. I have my reasons for that, so please don't hate me if you're a fan of them. But it is getting a bit frustrating. Anyway, so yeah, like I said, Daniel had been with Red Bull since he started in F1, which I think was when he was like about 18. But in 2018, he decided that he was not going to be driving for them anymore because he was sick to death of being put against his teammate and being made to feel guilty about things that he didn't really have much control over. So then it goes on, switches from Red Bull to Williams, like I've already said. And this team is quite interesting because it was actually at this time, because I know this isn't true anymore, but was run by Claire Williams, which I am going to be doing an episode on her when we start talking about females involved in motorsports. I know she's not a driver, but I still think, regardless of what some people think, because I've read some very negative comments about her, she's still a very inspirational woman, and she still worked in that line, in that world, and was in charge of a team, which ironically this team was actually started off by her father. So for the 80s and the 90s, again, I think we spoke about this in the very first video that I did, which was sort of a brief history of F1. When Williams first came into the sport, they were the underdog. Okay, they came from absolutely nothing, and they became one of the top teams, and that was like in the 80s and the 90s that they were quite successful, and they were one of the best teams out there. However, that success has dropped off over the last couple of years, which must be really frustrating for that team to go from the legacy that they had to absolutely being at the back of the grid and having loads of car problems instead of being right at the first and being a team that you really could compete with. So Claire mentioned, which is quite obvious, it's something that you would expect, her dad started this team off, so quite rightly so, Claire actually grew up around the sport. She would go to races as a child, and she would see what her dad did and how he ran the team and everything. So like I said, the Williams, they went from gaining like poles and podiums and being one of the top teams to struggling to even get any results, because what you'll be aware of is that it's only the top 10 drivers that get points. And I think you start off, if you win, you get like 25 points, but if you're 10th, you only get 1 point, and if you're anything after 10th, you get no points whatsoever. That's for both the constructorship and the championship for individual drivers. So one of the things I also noticed, and that I would like to point out, because I did notice it in this episode, was that there does seem to be quite a lot of women behind the scenes of F1. So I'm talking about, we have a lot of female engineers working for them, whether that's working on the cars or whether that's working in fuel, or even like just as part of this team, like Claire was, she headed that team, she was running the team, and she was quite high up in the team, she had quite a lot of powers, but there's still not really any women on the tracks. As such, what I say on the tracks as such, there's no women that really drive from at the beginning of the season to the end of the season for any of the teams really, and that they compete in the kind of championship. There's none of that. I know that there has been female test drivers and they have allowed females to drive on the track, but not actually competing against the men is what I'm on about. We've not had a female F1 driver win a championship because there just hasn't been any women on there. Again, we're going to go into a bit more about that when we start talking about the women, because there was quite interesting views from some people, especially Sir Sterling Moss. He had some very interesting views on women and driving, but like I said, we will get into that into another video. So when Claire came into this, she thought it was a great opportunity for her to turn this business around and try to get it back up to the legendary standard that it was back in the 80s and the 90s. Unfortunately, even though she has tried, because I think she came into the team in 2013, if I'm remembering correctly, and has left recently. I think this is the first season that she's not actually been heading it, but she still has some influence into the team because it's still part of her family legacy. For all her hard work, they're still really struggling to get points. They're really struggling to get into the top 10, and I don't believe that's got anything to do with the drivers, because I think the drivers have got the talent. I think it's just because they don't have as much money as some of the other teams to get the best car possible. Because the sport, you've got to be a really good driver and you've got to be a really good talent, but part of it is also having a really good car, but it isn't all about the car. You've got to know how to drive the car. It's a mixture of both the car and the driver. It's not one or the other. So another thing that I noticed in this episode that a lot of people keep saying, well, a lot of drivers, was that one of their favourite tracks was actually the Monaco Grand Prix. That was the best track. That they all seem to love it. They all seem to really enjoy going to Monaco. Monaco was a bit disappointing this year if you're a Mercedes fan. But yeah, the drivers do seem to really like it. It's one of the tracks that seem to challenge them. So it then goes back to Red Bull, and they seem to put more support behind Max than Daniel, because he was like the next generation. He was going to be the next best thing. He was going to be the next new driver, and like I've already said, he was going to be the youngest F1 championship winner. In their heads, they were really pushing for that, and it's something that Daniel had mentioned. So something that really stuck out to me and got really on my nerves when I watched this video was Max is seen on a boat with somebody from the team, and I can't remember what they asked. They asked him something about, oh, so you'll have to wash your own clothes or something like that now, and he was like, no. He said his mum still washes his clothes. His mum, I mean, this was back in 18, so he was 21 at this point in time, so he's a grown man, and apparently he can't even wash his clothes at that point. His mum was still washing them. I hope that that's not the case now, 3 years later, since he is now 23, 24, depending on what month his birthday is. I'm not sure, because I don't stalk him or anybody really, so I don't know. So Red Bull were a little bit sneaky. Then they found out that Daniel was considering jumping ship and going for a different team that might actually appreciate him a lot more than Red Bull after all those years that he had given to them. And they went and spoke to his father, which I think is a bit sneaky, because at this point Daniel wasn't an adult. You didn't really need to go around speaking to people's parents once they're grown up, but they tried to persuade Daniel's father that that he was still really important to them, but they say actions speak louder than words, and their actions certainly didn't scream that Daniel was important to them. It seemed to be Max was the one that they were all supporting. And it wasn't just Daniel and his family that picked up on this, so did the reporters, because a lot of the reporters are actually interviewed and involved in this documentary series, and they have a lot of interesting things to say, because they pick up on things and they're not as biased because they're outside of everything. And even they picked up on the fact that Red Bull was supporting Max more than they were supporting Daniel. So like I mentioned with the car, is that you obviously need a lot of money to win, and they have sponsorships. And the reason that I am mentioning about this is because also in this episode, this was the pink team at the time, or I forgot what they're called. They were called Force India. There we go, sorry, just remembered. You need a lot of money to win, and Force India brought in Lance Armstrong, who was a son of a billionaire, and he was going to be a sponsor, and he's going to pour a lot of money into this team, and so they couldn't really afford to get rid of Lance. And he basically, was he in Force India at this time? No, sorry, his dad eventually bought Force India, but not at this point. I can't remember what team he was racing for at this point, sorry. But his dad pretty much bought him a seat in F1. Or at least that's what I'm getting from this. But the thing is, at least Lance, he held his hands when he said he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. There's nothing worse than being spoilt and not actually admitting that you're just a little bit spoilt and that you're a little bit of a privileged git. At least he admits it. Like I said, there's nothing worse than people not admitting to things like that. So yeah, and again, just to clarify, it's always better to have the two drivers up on the podium, and you get that. So when I was learning about all this money and everything that goes into it, because I've got a bit of a weird sense of humour, the ABBA song "Money, Money, Money" came to my mind. If anybody knows anything about ABBA, which everybody should do because of Mamma Mia, and if you haven't seen those, then I highly recommend them too. Stop living in a shed and go and watch them. Anyway, back on track. So Max got rather cocky, as you do when you're 21 and you're male and you're in this driving seat and you're very famous, and you've got a lot of testosterone around your body. And he got rather cocky and he ended up crashing out during the qualifying, which meant that he had to start right at the very back when it came to Sunday's race. So Dan won the Monaco 2018 Grand Prix, which Max then spat his dummy out, if you will. And he did basically admit that it was very hard for him to be happy for his teammate to win, because Max wasn't on the podium. He didn't get on the podium. He didn't win. And he felt very betrayed by that, and he wasn't happy at all. Even though he did try to be happy, and he tried to at least pretend and show that he was happy. So give credit where credit is due. So that's all I have on episode 3, which, like I said, was a very interesting one to me because there was a lot of drama in there and a lot of things that did stick out. So, like I say, please do not forget to comment, share and subscribe. You can follow me on the social medias, which you can find in our channel's description box, but I can always put them in the description box for you guys so you can follow. And I will see you next time when we look at episode 4. Bye for now.